So David Smith, yes, that's his real name. And for our long-time guests, you may have seen him an incarnation as a Viking on a session some months ago now, doing some artificial intelligence stuff. Comes to us with an interesting background. So some of us deal with architecture. David has a master's in actual architecture, and then that wasn't enough, so he went to a master's in data science, and now he's got a loan to the government problem. Quite a hefty indexation, but nonetheless, David's now working as a program director at the Centre for Entrepreneurial Research and Innovation, which is a not-for-profit focused on commercialising technology research and innovation. So,
thank you.
Did I get all the keywords?
Yeah, wow. I don't know how you did, but it's impressive. Thank you.
David Smith, ethics, and looking after the people behind
Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here. I think that's a great talk to lead into because we're introducing those topics of user experience and user design. And I think that's pretty fundamental to what I'm going to be talking about. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a niche approach. So if you've been to talks before and heard about responsible AI and those kinds of things, I'm not going to be talking about that general topic specifically. It's going to be around that, but it's going to be talking about human-centric approaches. Okay, so who works with ML in their businesses at the moment? Not GPT to write your code or anything like that, but who actually does ML? Yeah? Cool, cool. Well, I'm not going to ask you because we went through it. Do you mind sharing like a use case? Is it in kind of prediction? Is it risk? Is it decision support? What do you use it for?
Yeah, more in the predictive space. So
predictive.
Customer behaviour. And
yeah.
Try and predict, what they from existing customers, and then what a new customer that might have similar characteristics, what their predictions.
Cool, cool. My talk won't be for you. No. so one of the things I want to address is that with this, it becomes machine learning and AI is really quite a broad topic. It's applied to a vast swathe of problems. Now the thing is, certain problems are high risk, certain problems aren't. If you're looking at, well, I just need to predict certain things, where you don't have humans involved, you don't have kind of allocation biases, you don't have kind of, things where, someone doesn't get a loan or something affects them entirely. So what I'm going to be doing is primarily talking about how these systems are used when we have that point of tension. So when we have that kind of human support element or decision support. Okay, so I think that's all I need to say on my opening slide. I'd first like to start by acknowledgement of country, acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the land in which we meet today, the original custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Okay, so let's look at AWS. So when searching responsible AI, I'm at an AWS kind of meetup. I thought I probably should look a bit more into it. So, everyone in these companies always talks about this kind of commitment to responsibility, right? Responsible AI, fair, accurate, robust, secure, those kinds of words. What I'm going to try and do is talk about, well, how certain of these situations or products that are derived can potentially be detrimental in certain use cases, and offer a word of caution when using and relying on some of them. Now, why is this important? Well, I don't really need to say, AI has kind of exploded. We've got the absolute Gartner's hype cycle right now. We've got generative, everything's buzzing, investments flowing. It's kind of nuts. So things are moving quickly and rapidly, and we see a lot of kind of power of these systems that can be used for good or bad. And it's trying to identify and create systems that do this in a better way. That was what we're going to talk about. Now, what I find really interesting is when we talk about this, certain words fall out of favour. Seems like as this is hyping up, so is responsible. We used to talk about, accountable and fair, but these have started to fall out of favour because they're not quite as defined enough. Responsible is that beautiful catch-all that we can kind of throw around and it sounds like we know what we're talking about. And then you get invited to stand up in front of people in an AWS meetup and talk about it. So, in terms of AWS products, you may have seen this. If you're looking with SageMaker, you may have Clarify, or you may have Model Monitor, which is an audit. I think it's the auditoring, actually. So Augment, I probably should say. There's various options that look at this, and most of them kind of work the same way, right? We look at explaining what the model was, doing when it made that prediction. It looks at the parameters, gives you some weightings, gives you an understanding of that, and that way you know what it's doing, and therefore you can make the right decision. Seems reasonable, right? Cool. So we look at that in a holistic process across, training, tuning, deploying, and monitoring. So we want to see if this is working across the entire life cycle. We want to pick up biases in the data at the start, look at it when we train it, and make sure we're not doing anything there, and then when we deploy and monitor, we want to track those biases as well. Again, sounds pretty reasonable. Augment is then looking at, well, okay, sometimes the model gets it wrong. Sometimes it's not confident. So let's put a human in the loop, right? If it's high confidence, we'll send it through the system. If it's low confidence, we'll get someone to look at this and look at the parameters. Cool. Sounds reasonable. Who knows Robodebt? Yeah, I put this slide here because, well, this was a catastrophic failure of government. That's plain and simple. Doesn't matter your political leaning, you have to agree that's that. It costs lives, millions, billions of dollars, and was horrifying. Here's my thing with this. Could you say the model was transparent? It's an average. You're just taking people's things and then comparing whether or not it's on an average. The model is transparent. I know what it's doing. Is it explainable? Yes. It's pretty simple. In fact, people were kind of laughing at the people who put this in place because it was so simple that they should know it's wrong. Okay, so we've got transparent, we've got explainable. Was there human oversight? Again, yes. People were in the loop. People were working with this model. Were they doing the right thing? No, but there were still people in the loop. Did it discriminate? Now, this could potentially be contentious because we did have lower socioeconomic people, we did have people with disabilities, we did have students, but on common demographics, age, gender, they weren't in there. It wasn't looking at that. It was taking data, putting an average in and saying, yeah, how do we go? It's transparent. You might have maybe a class imbalance, and you may pick this up in the monitoring phase, but you know, we'll see these things. We'll go over the camera. Yeah, cool, sorry. So, what I want to put to you is this thought. Now, you're my captive audience, right? This is my kind of general, maybe a few beers deep ramblings to certain people, having a design background, right? I've got to do it. I spent my master's degree and a lot of hexed on it, so I've got to use it somewhere. But how do we go beyond transparency and biases? Because sometimes, really, this isn't the root cause of the problem. And this is what I was addressing to you before, which is the idea of we could have a two-dimensional spectrum here of automation and complexity, human control, and we can map these things out. There's danger zones at the top where you have excessive human control or excessive automation, but certain things you want a computer to automate, right? There's certain things you don't want to do, it's not safe for a human, so you want to automate it. I have references down here, so if you want to check out the research behind anything, go for it. It's pretty interesting. But some things we don't want computers to do. We want human mastery. And that's that kind of craftsmanship element. This is where things get interesting. There's tension. And this is where decision-making sits. We want automation, and we want kind of help with this. But where do we draw the line? Who's the expert? Is the machine the expert? Am I the expert? And that tension is really difficult, because sometimes you may be a domain expert in working with a system. How you engage with that system changes. And also the flip side, if you're not an expert in working with an automated system, well, it changes. So again, thinking about this is complex. It's not a one-size-fits-all. This is a kind of idea that I always think about with these kind of processes, and it comes back to the idea of the prediction machines. AI is not making a decision, right? It is making a prediction. The idea of a decision is it requires judgment. A model can't think beyond the parameters in which it's trained, beyond its life cycle. Maybe we can filter information in, but it's making a prediction. There is no judgment in it. It's very important, I believe, to understand that language and start to propagate it. So if you learn anything, just talk about predictions, don't talk about decisions. And that's one step to kind of removing that stigma, that understanding, so that you are talking in a way that you're saying what the role of the machine is. And the goal here is to make fewer human predictions and more human judgment. We want oversight. Well, okay, how do we do that? Because what we can see is this is where we look at human-centric approach. How do we design systems that enable us to work with it in tandem, right? We need to understand the motivations, the person who's going to be using it and engaging with it. This comes back to that user experience. What does the person want out of this system? What's the goal? What do you need? And it's a very interesting thing because a lot of people get lost in the technology and don't think about the end use case. And we see that with transparent AI models. When we train these processes to create predictions, weightings, things like that, We think, cool, that's great. But then how we engage with those platforms is incredibly dangerous. And this comes down to the idea of affordances and signifiers, right? Technology or anything affords certain interactions. A light switch that's a button, you'll push. It's intuitive. You'll flip a switch because it lends flipping. You'll twist and rotate a knob. There's certain signifiers in the design of that you pick up on it. And I think we all hate the door we push when we're meant to pull. It's about the design of the door. It's not your fault. It's the system in which you've been put into. Maybe that's just victim mentality, I don't know. But it's this idea that when you're building these systems, you need to think about how you're going to afford certain types of interactions. This is probably my favorite and most beautiful image. It looks pretty reasonable, right, at first? You're like, oh yeah, it's just a kettle. And then you go, hang on, how? And this is that idea of kind of ingrained biases in our way of thinking. I think people probably have seen this one before, this idea of, is it a farmer? Is it a librarian? Who's seen this before? Yeah? Oh, it's only one. Okay, cool. Steve is very shy, withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with a little interest in people, the world, and reality. Oh, sorry. A meek and tidy soul. He looks for need in order, structure, and passion for detail. Who thinks he's a librarian? Oh, cool. Yeah, there's a couple. Yeah. You're gonna get into it. Come on. Yeah, there's a few. All right, who thinks he's a farmer? Yeah, there's a few. Okay, so this is really interesting. We've actually got a nice balance here. But for those that think he's a librarian, right? What if I then told you that in Australia, these are the numbers of librarians versus farmers? Does that seem reasonable? You go, yeah, that makes sense. There's more farmers than there are librarians. Now, would you update your kind of potential understanding of that to say, hey, hang on, it's probably more likely to be in a subset of shy, introverted, potentially farmers than he is going to be a librarian. But again, what we do is we engage with this system one thinking, which is this automated response. We think, because you said this, oh, it has to be a librarian, because that's just intuitive. But as soon as you take a moment to think and think, oh, well, there's a lot more farmers than there are librarians, you think, oh, well, that was kind of stupid. Let's consider this properly. And this is that idea which I want to get across, which is that most of us make intrinsic decisions and then build up the reasoning behind it. We do this post hoc. I bought so many things that I did not need because I went, I need this. There's all these reasons why I need it. And never use it. And we've all done that. It's the way we're wired. When we study this in sociology, you actually understand that this is how we engage with these systems. Oh, I hit the wrong button. So when we look at explainable AI, post hoc does not work. Again, little asterisk, I won't say in all cases. When we're talking about decision support, this has been studied and proven that this does not work. Why? Because humans are wired to look at a decision and post-rationalize. And if we're not super confident in our domain, guess what we're going to do? We're going to look at all these parameter weightings and go, yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. It's considered all these things. It's smart. Maybe I'll believe it. Maybe I'll trust it. Seems good. Seems nice. I like my model. Saves me work. Because we fall into system one thinking because it's easier. We reduce our cognitive load, we go with the flow, we check out and we go to the beach. It's the West Australian kind of ideology. So I'm going to probably move through this pretty quickly. Again, I've taken a fair bit of your time. I do apologise. But how do we design these systems that work? Well, we need to think about this within the jobs to be done. Now, one way to do this is think about your stakeholder groups. Who's your user segmentation and what do they need out of the model? Are they a developer? Are they an auditor? Are they a manager? Where do they sit in this? What's their level of expertise? And understand that they have specific questions that they ask from the model. This here, again, they'll be provided, I guess. This here is some research that looked at what the question is versus ways to explain it, and then looked at the AI, the explainable AI method that actually gives you that explanation. Because again, not all of them give the same information, but if we look at it, we may trust it. There's certain things about affordances and trustful cues that we need to kind of break down. We need to move beyond this idea of providing people with enough information, like, there's huge dashboards with all these things going on. It's like, at the end of the day, I don't care. I can only focus on so much. Give them what they need. And this was another study that looked at filtering out all the kind of elements from what was, in the prediction, creating a more biased variation of that, which is really interesting, but human bias, biased to what the user tends to engage and agree with, it's actually led to an increase in model performance within tandem with humans. Because they were looking for certain key things that they could connect with. Once you give it all, you think that's reasonable. And this is an interesting one, which is parameter-based versus example-based. K&N, counterfactuals. What's the closest thing to this? If this, then that. If not, then that. It's the way in which we understand. It's more biased. There's a lot of issues in it, but that's the way in which we engage with these systems. But again, you want to be communicating that bias as well. Now, the goal of all this is to create anti-fragile systems. Systems that as you attack them, as you look at them, as you pull in your stakeholder groups, which is always fun, they're going to pull things out and say, I don't believe in that, no, this is wrong, that doesn't work. Now, an anti-fragile system increases in its stability over time as you attack it. That's what you need in responsible AI. You're never going to get it right first off. You need to be iterative. What you don't want is a system that is fragile and will break down. This is where you have unintended consequences when you don't listen to the stakeholders of the user groups. The goal is to make this system robust. Now, there's that nice way, which is the carrot, which is like, oh yeah, we're going to get good things, happy things. The other way is the stick. You need to have skin in the game. How do you break from system 1 thinking to system 2 thinking? When something is on the line. You need to be invested. Someone needs to be accountable for the decisions across the process, holistic process, for each step. When you're handing things over, it needs to be coming back to someone. And then they leave the organization and then no one knows who it is and then it's on someone's laptop that you don't know where it is. But you need to have some kind of accountability and checks and balances. So I've painted this kind of picture that is kind of, we need to think about humans in this process. We need to think about the evolutions of humans. We need to understand how we interact with the systems, understand the user experience. Because industrial designers, UX designers, they may seem like a pain and it's wishy-washy, but it's very much important. Because if we don't do this, we lead to worse quality outcomes and more potential for harm. And we don't want to end up in our little pod. I don't know if anyone got the Matrix reference. But that's all from me. I thank you very much. And any questions? Sorry, I'm looking over this.
So essentially, I'm wondering about feedback. And you mentioned it towards the end. I didn't see it a lot mentioned earlier on. And
Yes.
there's probably two aspects to feedback. One is that's presumably human involvement, but is there an automated feedback? And I was thinking in terms with respect to prototype, where clearly the thing screwed up right from the beginning. People knew it screwed up right from the beginning, and there was no feedback.
Yes.
Now that was probably a political decision, but I'm just wondering if you've got something additional to say with respect to that.
Definitely. So two things. One, we'll read the recommendations in the report, political decisions, and, you know, a lot of kind of internal struggles and politics and various other things going on. So definitely. And again, understanding if your system's making billions of dollars, you might be a little bit hesitant to go, I'm going to turn that off. But again, look at what happened, massive class action, huge amounts of loss. The whole point is that there needs to be accountability, and we might see that coming out of the Royal Commission, we might not. The thing about feedback is definitely 100% agree with that. So a lot of this stuff is about a loop. Because you're going to put something in place, it's going to fail, it's going to do something, you need to feed it back, you need to tweak, you always need to change it. You found this as well. Whether or not that's automated, yeah, you could definitely pull out metrics and start studying how people engage with this and putting KPIs in place. There's a really good handbook, I don't want to mention, it's in a competitor's company actually. Google's put together this handbook which is pulling on that, which is key questions to ask through that process. It's really interesting if you're interested in that side. And then feedback is incredibly important to learning. So when Toyota were looking at automating their factories, right, they were looking at, we can just basically automate everything. We don't need engineers. I don't have a whiteboard, I like to draw on whiteboards. But essentially what they realized were like, well, what happens when something goes wrong? There's no one around who kind of knows how it was working. So they kind of come in and they look at the systems, they diagnose, and there's that time lag. Number two, and this is a really important one, is there's no one around to think about innovation. How do I take this system? How do I make it better? How do I leverage what I know throughout this process? And one of the things, I mean, my background in architecture is one of the key failures in architecture is the lack of feedback. Because architects design, they don't build. Builders build. There's no feedback between the two. I mean, there is feedback, there's no hands-on feedback.
It's a lot harder to modify your output as well.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is once you don't iterate through that process and get that direct feedback, right? The client sit there and go, why the hell am I paying an architect to design this when the builder knows how to build it? The builder can tell the architect what to draw, done. So this thing happened. Like, it's happened in construction. We've got 80% design construct contracts. That has changed, large-scale construction. But again, a lot of that comes back to feedback. And that's, there's a really good book on that, Craftsman, by Richard Sennett, looking at that whole feedback loop. So yes, very important.
Thanks.
That was almost longer on the question than the talk. Yeah.
You mentioned that the AI bias and AI is, so basically, definitely you want to measure how much bias it has happened. Is there any benchmark? So you build a model, and then is there external benchmarking against that model? One build model A and then model B and C. How are you going to benchmarking it?
Yeah, so if you look at some of the stuff around SageMaker, Clarify, and various other kind of metrics on that, you can do that with your model monitoring tools. So you would set internal things which would say, okay, here's my bias limit based upon these classes. I want to see and make sure it stays within here. So you can actually go through. It's actually quite a good interface. I went through and went, I don't want to be like calling it out, being like, this is terrible, but it's really good at explaining what the things are and giving you a really humanistic kind of point of view. So it's, yeah, you're looking at those kind of metrics, you set your thresholds, you want to be alerted from drift and various other things. And you can do that for even protected classes, even if it's not within your model. So you can, well, from your kind of key parameters. So you can say, all right, this thing on the side here, I want to make sure that there's no proxy to it within this data here. So you're also looking for biases even when they're not there. So you're subsetting it out. Does that answer the question?
No, yeah, to a certain extent.
And then the model, you're comparing benchmarking from your model for, yeah. So, and that comes back to that feedback idea where it's like you've got something in place, you want to iterate, test something new, was it good? No, shit, roll back. Oh, sorry. And then work through that, yeah.
So, is there an implied team topology or two that arises from this? Are you recommending a pattern? Is it organisational? Is it in the development teams? Where's the impact? Where we see the accountability?
Yeah, now this is a really interesting thing when you get into kind of governance structures and organisational structures. I'm not in that space, particularly, especially not in large organisations. I've only really existed in small. So I couldn't probably say, yeah, you need a team that just studies this, you know, at the wazoo, you pay them. I'm not sure. I think a lot of people are obviously looking for that accountability factor, and it's going to potentially start to come into play. So understanding who or what is in control at certain stages is really important. But in terms of the team, I tried to talk to this into just data scientists in general, because I don't think that they should be separated from understanding the impact of their outcomes or their models. They need to be thinking holistically, where's their value that they're creating, where's their potential risks, what potential harm are they causing. So understanding that is, I think, intrinsic to what they do. As a profession, you kind of should be doing that. I mean, you know, you can't have a psychologist and just go, oh yeah, I'll just kind of mess with people and see how it goes. We've created a whole framework around that, which essentially, if you want to do something for responsible AI and whatnot, just go to the psychologist's guidelines for the practitioners. Hit Control F and just replace it with data scientist. Because it all talks about, you know, fairness, dignity, justice. It's like, oh, that kind of fits in. You can pretty much just do a Control F and replace. But yeah, I don't know.
Maybe that's part two.
Well, yeah, 15 minutes. Sorry if it went longer. So, okay, no more questions, or cool.
We do have time for another one if anything must come up.
I think everyone's ready for the beers and the pizza at the back. So,
Round up, please. Round of applause again for us.
Thank you.